Okay. Well, I shared just a point of reference, which is a slideshow that'll help the session today, and I'll continue to serve as a facilitator, acknowledging Susan's chairpersonship of this informal group. But I think I've by this time met most of the folks on the call, and so perhaps unless I see any big notice to do otherwise, we'll pass on the round the table introductions.
Why don't we
Last
just
week,
have everybody put their name and
okay,
location thing in the chat? Nice.
great. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so if folks want to say hello in the chat, that will help us move along. And you know, uh, I think what I'd prefer to do rather than, well, I guess we're going to share screens because you guys have a whole slideshow. So why don't I go ahead and just while we get started, I will um, share the screen here on my end, and then we will pass it over to, oops, I gotta get to the right place to do that. Yeah. Okay, one moment. I will share screen. This one here. And let's see if this is working correctly. Okay. So yes, we're back in the EDF working group of the Redwood Region Rise Collaborative. And today we're gonna aim to cover the agenda items here. And I guess the first one is Susan's welcome. So now for you, Susan.
Well, I will just thank you again for showing up, that we are going to, better solidify sort of how we are interacting with the other tables for Redwood Region Rise. But for right now, we're just doing some training so that everybody who's attending these meetings gets some case studies, see some different financing things that we've been doing, and then also allows us to better look for options for financing for all of the projects that come through our region. So do you want me to just move right into our restoration project?
Yeah, I think so. If I could just say a couple things to back up on that, because our team with the RGS end has been, doing some preparatory work and things around these agenda items over the last several weeks since we last met. And we have also been, of course, getting more and more familiar with what's happening around the region. And I know that there are several related activities going on in different counties. I see um, Stacy here and the team from EDFC and Mendocino who are putting on a finance workshop coming up Monday. And so just this, I think the activity that this working group represents is, the cross-county convening of folks dealing with economic development finance, and recall that this is sort of a preparatory phase for perhaps a larger and broader community engaged effort around increasing our capacity in that area. So along with sharing information like Susan and the team are going to talk about today, we're, I think, familiarizing ourselves with concepts, with practices, and then with each other, so that when we move from this smaller working group setting out to a larger community, that we would have some common language or at least points of reference. So I think that's really how our team, and in working with Susan and Amanda more frequently these days, how we've been thinking about this working group. So with that, maybe now would be the time to pass over the screen share to you, Susan, and
Sure.
you guys do
And
the
I do
thing.
want to say, I'm really excited about some of the stuff we're talking about a little later on, because Josh has done some good thinking about how we're going to move forward with this group. And for those of you who don't know, it has been announced that we did receive the Catalyst grant, which is the $14 million grant for the region. $9 million of that is specifically going to funding for projects. And so we will definitely play a part in that, as well as looking for funding for some of those projects that maybe don't get funded through the state. So today we wanted to start, I'd like to be able to show each time, so think about it if you have one coming up, a case study of some special financing that we've done. And one that we're particularly fond of at AEDC is the Carson Block building. So today I will be switching the slides and maybe asking some questions, but we have Ross Welch, our executive director here, as well as Greg Gare and Chris Byfield and Madison from NCIDC, who are going to talk about some of the highs and lows and the greatness and the woes of going through this process. So I am going to share my screen now, and then we will start working on the project. Here is my deal. I do not use PowerPoint on Zoom, and I know there's all kinds of special things. So if you guys could just see it, could you see it now? I know it's not in the slideshow format, but
It's good.
perfect.
Yeah.
I don't want to spend a bunch of time figuring it out. So today our product is the Carson Block building restoration in Old Town Eureka. It's a whole block size project. And Greg, I will invite you to start and talk about how did this start, and how how did it start?
Why don't you stick on that first picture for a second?
The first one? Yeah.
Yeah, please. But it was back in, I think it was 86, that NCIDC bought the Carson Block building. It was owned by a consortium of local business people. A couple of them, Sam Winston. Most of them aren't with us anymore. Ralph Matson. I think there were 4 primary investors that owned the building. The building was stuccoed. The building was unreinforced from a seismic, partial masonry, unreinforced. NCIDC was a tenant in the building, and as we expanded more and more in the building and kept asking the owners, the partners to do their various things for modifications, tenant improvements, as we expanded our operations, they began to become persistent, saying, you guys should really buy this building. And knowing that it was unreinforced, but then it had issues, and it had maintenance issues and a leaking roof and a lot of other things. The management at that time still decided to go ahead and buy the building, and we did that. The owners carried a lot of the paper on it, and we actually paid it off. But after the Loma Prieta earthquake and the higher standards for seismic retrofit and the actual threat of action by government if you don't deal with the retrofit of your buildings, it became imperative for NCIDC, who is now the owner of this building, to figure out a way to do a seismic retrofit and to preserve it and to make it be a viable asset into the next century. And there were, over the course of the next decade and a half, 2 decades, 3 engineering studies done on this building. And each time we would do one, it would come back and it would have big metal girders right in the middle of the visible in the front windows and in the retail spots. And it just had such a disturbance of the character and nature of the building that it really wasn't feasible to carry out. And so we finally hooked up with a firm down in Sacramento, CYS Engineering. Ken Luttrell, who's now retired, was the engineer, who actually was doing the historic structure seismic inspections of all the state-owned facilities, and had become developed quite a reputation as somebody who knew how to use historic building codes and current standards to incorporate the structural strength of historic structures and add the right amount of moment frames and all the other support systems that they put into a building like this to make it seismically sound. And by combining with him and other teams of architects, multiple architects, both historic architects and traditional architects, some of which we've been working with for decades doing the engineering studies, we finally were able to develop a plan, but it was a very ambitious plan. And that plan first had to involve, the first thing we had to do was to fix the roof. And you say that the roof was leaking, the building was being compromised, and we needed to do something to save the building. We wrote an initial grant to the California Cultural and Historic Endowment, and got over $1 million. And that was to do some facade work and some exploration of facade restoration, as well as the roof work. And it was one of the first things that fell in place on this project, to try and make it work. But as we tried to move beyond that, it became really obvious that we needed local participation. Nobody wanted to talk to us on any kind of a funding, loan, or grant basis without showing serious local participation. And that's when we came to Ross and came to AEDC and talked about what we might be able to do locally that would allow us then to leverage more money. And Ross, you want to chime in here and talk a little bit about what you were able to discover and put together for the initial loan that helped start the dominoes on this project?
Sure. And what was neat about this project is you had all the heavy lifting done. And I think the part that was left out a little bit is that you guys were going to use redevelopment funds with the city of Eureka. And then the state of California said, oh, by the way, no more redevelopment, go away. And instantly,
yep,
that went away. And so that's how we got involved. And initially, the roof was leaking, but it was designed, your new roof was designed for the actual earthquake retrofit. So it kind of worked out well in that you needed a new roof, and the roof that we financed and you put on actually was structurally designed for the rest of the project, but you didn't know where the money was coming. So what we did, we needed $1.5 million, and this is where our first time ever doing some capital stack like this. But when I found out what you guys, Northern California Indian Development Council is a consortium of different tribes. And so I looked in the manual, there is no manual, but I knew that there's BIA guarantees, Bureau of Indian Affairs. So how do we get one? So we went out and I asked them and found out that this would qualify for a BIA guarantee because no bank wants to finance a building that has structural issues. It's an unreinforced masonry, which was the whole point of doing this. So, but BIA was willing to guarantee this. We had to prove that, we've done loans before and we passed. And so we put $1.5 million on there, paid off a little small amount on the first, but was able to fund the roof part and put it together. We divided it up by 4. It was AEDC, Headwaters Fund, Humboldt Area Foundation, and REDEC, Redwood Region Economic Development Commission. We each took $375,000 participation, did $1.5 million, and got the BIA guarantee. So that got the foot in the door, got the roof fixed because you can't have a leaky roof. And then the rest of it started happening as far as that allowed Greg and company to start shopping for some other items, which is, I guess, the next slide. So
the next,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say never done this before, at least I haven't, but this was an over-the-counter community development block grant of $1.5 million and also $3.6 million CDBG loan. And it was designed to come back behind all the other financing, which we'll show. But that $3.6 million was done at 0% because it doesn't cash flow until everything else is paid off. In other words, when you do a retrofit like this, it doesn't make any more square footage and stuff. It's just earthquake retrofitting it. So you have the same basic floor plan. It's all buffed up really cool, but it doesn't increase your cash flow. So that's why the CDBG was interested in doing this and the city, and because one, you're going to have a brand new building when it finally gets done. And so that's worthy of the grant and the loan. So that's another part of the capital stack. Oh, that's my short version.
originally we had asked for those numbers to be inverted. We'd asked for, no more than a 1.5 million in loan, and of course the other 3.6 million in grant, and actually have the support of the city in the initial stages. But these things are reviewed at the state level, HCD and the powers that be. And at the time, they were looking for much heavier percentage loan, much smaller percentage grants. I'm not sure. I hear it may not be the same way now, but it was that time. And their assertion, their advice to us was, when you have completed the entire project and you have achieved all the goals and objectives and you've unwound and the project is ended, you have the ability to go back to the city, who gets the repayment of the loan, and make a case for a partial forgiveness or conversion of the loan to a grant. But we are not going to approve that at the beginning of the project. You're gonna book this as a loan, like Ross says, coming in after everything else. And 0% interest until it does come due, and then you can go back and talk to the city. And so when we get to the end of the unwind story, we'll pick up this story again and talk about what ended up happening with the CDBG, which was the next component of financing that fell into place after the CCHE grant and the AEDC consortium loan with those partners that Ross listed.
So, and I do want to put a shout out to our loan manager, Kelly Sterling, because as Jeff Lucas, who's on this call, will tell you, CDBG loans and grants are not easy. They're incredibly persnickety. And so it really did help having her relationship building to support the city and helping to get this done in the way that Kelly had the experience of knowing it needed to get done. So,
and they actually set up a team, a CDBG team from Sacramento right where Greg's sitting. We sat around and Kelly was there, going over this whole project at one point before they approved it.
A team effort for sure. Okay, next slide.
And we loved having an Indigenous loan officer. That was really wonderful. One of the things that CDBG did do, because of some of the components of financing, it threw us into prevailing wage, which did escalate the cost of the project. Although I'm not, as an employment and training nonprofit, we're not against prevailing wage. I'm against living wage. I'm for living wage for all people that are working, but it did escalate the economics of the project. Yeah, the next thing that we went was to shop for tax credits, and the building was proposed to be not only a seismic retrofit, but really, in order to sell the seismic retrofit, the thing most people were interested in was the historic restoration of what was a flagship building in the Old Town Eureka area, and the economic revitalization. And that's what's recognized by both the historic tax credits and the new market tax credits, was both the economic and historic sides of this project. And those aspects of what we planned to do, and indeed ended up succeeding in doing, were really what gave us the ability to also do a top flight seismic retrofit for this building, that didn't destroy its historical integrity, that didn't have steel beams running through the fronts of windows, that didn't do anything that really detracted from the building hardly in any way, but made it much, much safer from a seismic perspective.
Actually, there's some beautiful stuff. This picture here shows some of the stuff that was covered up that was just gorgeous, that we now get because of the work that they did. So
it was like a archaeological exploration. We had specialists, architect specialists, Turner and Pagebull, and we had Page and Turnbull. Thank you. And we had Bill Hole was one of the local experts on the project. There were a lot of people, and they would come out and literally go in and do excavations in various parts of the facade. And one of the things they found out was we were really lucky when they stuccoed this building. And that picture up at the front, if you remember, on the left side of that first picture, you saw the stuccoed building. On the right-hand side, you saw the restored building. Well, they covered most of the building in tar paper and put the stucco on top of the tar paper. That's not true of every part of the building, but 90% of it was true. So as we ripped stucco out and off, we discovered there was a barrier between it and the original terracotta and redwood and other elements of the building underneath it, which really made the restoration possible. This wasn't a recreation. There were elements that had to be recreated to put up, the turret on the 3rd and F Street corner being one of the most major parts. But it was a restoration. There were things that we didn't even know existed on the building that we didn't find out until we peeled off that stuccoed facade that was on the outside of the building. Really talking about tax credits in terms of talking financing, the next step was to try and put together a project and find a broker who could shop our project to people who were interested in tax credit and getting those tax credits and financing projects that would allow them to take advantage of the tax credits. And that's where all of a sudden we realized that we had jumped into the deep end of the pool.
I'm going to show that. I'll show that.
Yeah, by all means, there's
I don't know if you can read it, but the guys wanted you to see how complicated it is.
Well,
that's a flow chart prepared by the consultants that shows you there's at least half a dozen different. There's half a dozen different entities that were created, quality Bs and master tenants and property management forms and the holding companies for the tax credit partners, and each of those boxes is a different legal entity, and the money circulates around those entities in a tax credit deal almost as if you're watching water flush down a toilet.
But you pay a lot of money to have this put together, though. There's professionals that do this on a daily basis because no one really understands it.
And part of what we had is because there was not enough money in new market tax credits, and there wasn't enough money in historic tax credits. There wasn't enough money in CDBG, and we had to glue all of these things together. So this was a hybrid tax credit deal with both historic and new market tax credits put together, 2 different structures that had to interrelate. They had different startup periods, different unwind periods, different rules, and each had their own monitoring and auditing and various requirements. And it was unbelievable to me. I mean, if I get on my soapbox, that this is the most efficient and effective way to finance a project. The convoluted mind that came up with this concept is one that fascinates me. But it did produce the money. It did produce the money that eventually put in almost over $11 million in construction costs, and some total almost $17 million total, hard, soft, and other costs combined. Including all these people who dipped their beaks to make money on the process as they went through to make sure they were getting their fair share of returns for the investments they were putting in and the tax credits that they were utilizing. Chris, you want to add anything to the intricacies of the model?
The part that is kind of there was a bunch of money, and what Ross alluded to is the equity community builders down in San Francisco, who was the broker and helped kind of develop the elevator pitch of this stuff. They weren't paid up front. There was attorneys for all the different parties. There was accountants. There was finance people. And I believe when the actual deal closed and the money got funded, there was close to $1 million in payments that went out to different people right off the bat for everybody getting their full payment for all of the work they did. So NCIDC didn't really have to put up any money. You can see in the top left corner of the slide where that shows some of our equity portions and the AEDC loan, the CCHE. But the money moved through the different entities. The other parts of this are there's the Consortium America and the California Statewide Development Corporation put up the money, and U.S. Bank Corp did the kind of maintaining of it. But it was very difficult to kind of figure it all out. And all the people who said they would be there with us all the way through kind of disappeared as soon as they got their money. And the only people that really helped us was the CPA firm that was kind of booked into this process as the people who had created the financial model. But as Greg likes to joke around, those accountants make twice what an attorney makes. So
yeah, there's a reason.
There's a reason they stuck around.
And it was interesting. We learned as we went through this process that for example, people put in order to make enough money to make the project viable, there were some rosy projections done by consultants and advisors in the project, which didn't really pan out when the rubber hit the road as the project moved on through development. And every time there was a change order or a cost overrun or another factor into the model, that came out of us. That somehow came back to us, whether it was coming out of our developer's fee, whether it was coming out of our management fee, whether it was coming out of cash reserves, it came back to us. And so it was a scary proposition as we watched this unfold. And I want to give a shout out. I did not manage this process. I was the assistant director during this time. Terry Coltra is the man who had the guts to jump off the cliff and do this deal. He's no longer with us, but this building is a tribute to Terry Coltra, and I always like to make sure I give him credit because he was the one that had both the vision and the courage to do this process. Having gone through it, I think I was asked half jokingly by Susan, "Would you do it again?" And I said, "Not at this age. I would not. I'm 68. I would not do it again. Some younger people might, but I would not."
The other thing I asked was, would you recommend this for other people?
And it depends on how bad you want to achieve it. It depends on, and I think that the thing that you have to know is that this will absorb a much more significant percentage of your time over the course of 7 years than you would have believed possible. Multiple audits, every single different tax credit partner and agency wanting to come in and monitor you separately. The left-hand turns that were unexpected that require you to put together whole new exhibits and packages, financial and construction and others. It was a all-consuming project. The results are wonderful. The results have created a jewel of a building, an asset to the NCIDC as a corporation. There's no doubting that the return came back to the agency, but I had hair when it started. The big part of this, though, is that you give up ownership. We did not own the building during this entire time. The building is deeded over to using a ground lease, master lease.
A ground lease to what they call the landlord, which is the QALC, the Qualified Affordable Low Income Community Building, and it technically owned the building through a ground lease, and I believe it was like 55% them, 45% us, and that 45% came through the master tenant, which came through the property management LLC. Like Greg alluded to, the kind of sophistication of what occurred is not for the faint of heart, and it's takes a lot of kind of digesting to figure out what the heck you're doing.
And being willing and committed to seeing the whole process through. There is no guarantee that you get your building back at the end of this. They have to, this has to be an arm's length relationship. So at the end, in the unwind, they have to offer to sell you back your asset. And there are some rules of the road, some written, some unwritten. And part of the reason that we picked the partners that we did pick, that agreed to finance us and that we agreed to do business with, was US Bank Corp and their tax credit division, because we were already doing a lot of business with US Bank, and because we felt like we would have a fair treatment from our tax credit partners as they took ownership of our building, and then passed that on to the master tenant, which we operated, and subleased the building out that they owned, and then work at the end on the unwind process to get this building back. You want to talk a little bit about the unwind?
The deal with the devil that the prior executive director made, which may have been made clear to him, but did not become clear to Greg and myself until we were knee deep in the muck, is they structured this thing with a budget that was very tight. So like Greg mentioned, any cost overrun started to eat into it, because to get the project funded, it was very tightly budgeted, and it ran over budget almost immediately, starting to cut into the money that we thought we would be getting out of the deal. Also, the back end of the model, there were to again make it work, there were projections on rental income and net income that the building would generate that were unreasonable, and it was not clear to us that anytime we missed those projections, that was getting added to the put price. So anything that we missed along the way that didn't come out as promised in the beginning was added on the price to get us out of the deal.
For us to buy back our building. The unwind process did work. The unwind process happened. It took a year and a half.
There's between the beginning of the project and when we were eligible for unwind was the 7-year compliance period, and about 2 of that got eaten up with construction. And then the unwind was probably about a year. They had to run concurrently, but not really they didn't have the same end dates, because once you started them, one ended 3 or 4 months before the other one.
New market ended first and historic tax credit ended
But we
second.
did end up having to, again, go back to Ross and AEDC to, part of the bridge loan was made permanent because we didn't have sufficient funds for construction. So we had to refinance what was remaining of that. There was other parts of the put prices that just, some of the stuff that I just alluded to, we had to buy out the partners on top of it at the end, and Ross was generous enough to run back and save us again.
Yeah, well, I worked with this consortium of partners, and we walked out at the unwind with a mortgage that was almost identical to the amount that we walked into it with. And not a bad thing. I mean, fair, considering the $11 million in hard construction costs and the shape and condition of the building once done, the beauty of the building once done, to end up with a mortgage of, again, about $1.5 million was a beautiful thing. One big piece of this that I promised I'd get back to was revisiting the city and saying, look, I know that, you know, we were talking to Dave Tyson and all kinds of people who weren't even, no council members, no city managers, none of them who we talked to when we began this project are with the city anymore. But we would like to revisit the concept of forgiving some of the CDBG loan and converting the loan to a grant. And the city worked with us on that, and they did. They got a payment from us of a small portion of what was due, and they converted the rest of the loan to a grant upon successful completion of the project. And had they not done that, the financing, the financial outlook of this building right now today would be much different. And the city's been a very good partner from the beginning through to the end on this project, and I think we all enjoy the benefit of what we worked on together.
I was
The
going to say
building
that.
is
Sorry to
go
interrupt.
ahead.
I was just going to say the overall, this is probably the most complex thing I've ever seen. And I was talking to someone who did the new market tax credits. He said, well, because you have historic tax credits too. And he said, I don't think I'll ever mix those two together because they're two very complex things. But we've used this as an example on a nationwide webinar with Humboldt Area Foundation and another finance group, mainly to show the capital stack and how all these things coming together. This one is unique in that it has like everything and the kitchen sink. And I probably wouldn't recommend doing every single thing on the planet, but it's great for an example to show. And the power of new market tax credits. Even it's a lot of work, but at the end, you've got real equity into this building. And like you tying it all up together, we started with maybe $1.5 million. And then when it's all said and done in 8 years, we've been here the whole time. And then the unwind, it's probably not much different than that, except you got an $18 million building now with all the latest stuff. It's kind of amazing. And I just admire you guys for hanging it together to do this.
So I appreciate you guys coming. We were supposed to wrap up at about 4, so we're just for as complicated as this was, we did a good job sort of keeping it on time. Do you have a wrapping up thought, Greg?
I just want to let you know that as a result of what we've done, one of the things I'm very proud of is that this building is currently 100% rented up. Every retail spot, every office suite, people line up and get on the waiting list to get in this building. We are at 100% rent up. That is not something every commercial facility in Eureka can say.
That is true. And your neighborhood cleaned itself up after that too, because everybody wanted to keep up with the Joneses, and it was a very nice thing for Eureka.
I totally agree.
And I'll pass it back to you, Josh. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan and Greg and the team there. Yeah, really impressive finance project and description. And, I think it dovetails quite well into the rest of the program, because you know, I think for folks who may have been watching that and thinking, well, my project is maybe not a building remodel, or my project is a program or a combination of capital and program work. You know, I think hearing the outcome actually that your building is fully, you know, leased out and is a center of commerce in town, I think draws a direct line between, first of all, the work, the long capital refurbishment project, and the economic development outcomes that the city and the community has wanted. But I think it's also relevant to our program because you'll hear from another member of our team, Brian Mora, who has, along with us, been looking at the projects that have been submitted under the RISE, you know, project database. And indeed, there's quite a range of projects. They are across multiple types, you know, capital infrastructure type projects and, you know, programmatic projects. And so these are some of the questions that I think, as you know, the consortium, the collaborative moves forward and trying to allocate some of these $9 million now that have just been awarded from the state, you know, to consider the level of the type of project and the readiness of that project to receive financing. A lot of these topics that you talked about today are going to be very relevant. So, yeah, this is just a great program. I was trying to think about who or what project might be next. And so keep that in mind, perhaps before the end of the working group. If anyone has a great idea, the one that came to my mind, just because I'm somewhat familiar with it, is the Ukiah Streetscape project, which was another great municipal project. And, you know, the economic development outcomes in terms of downtown revitalization and commerce perhaps are still unfolding. But I think, as you alluded to, Susan, you know, you do a project like this that reestablishes the quality character of a downtown, and that can, you know, have these ripple effects to the other parts of the town. So again, really great examples of kind of local economic development. So let's see, I have my slide thing open here, kind of to your tune, Susan, trying to manage it so that I can manage the Zoom window easy too. But I think what I'll do is bring up the next slide here, which gets to the topic that that Brian and I were working on. I think, Brian, you're going to cover this one in terms of our thinking around how this group, and this was one of the things that Susan and I talked about early on in taking on this work, is how will this group interface with the recommendations that are now going to be going up from the sector tables to the collaborative in terms of priority projects. And so this is what we are putting forward and would welcome discussion about. And I got to make sure my computer doesn't all of a sudden go out of power, but getting a weird note here on that. But Brian, do you want to take over here?
Sure. I mean, I think that what we've done, as Josh indicated, is we looked at the question that was provided to us at an earlier meeting, which was basically, what is the role of the EDF working group and how does it relate to the sector tables and to the collaborative at large? And as we looked at it, we came up with this diagram, which hopefully is helpful to everyone in terms of understanding how the process could work and the flow. And essentially what we're thinking is that, as we see it, the EDF is really the place where a project finance assessment program and matrix could be developed, where the initial project finance feasibility and details could be evaluated, And then that ranking could be sent back to the sector tables and ultimately to the HRTC. So that's kind of how we see it. And we recognize that in the original discussion, there was talk about the projects initially being submitted, going through the sector tables, and then the sector tables referring them to the working group, and then the working group coming up with some evaluation and recommendations, and then sending them back to the sector tables. So that's kind of how we see it. But as I said, we prepared this diagram for you to review and comment on, and certainly be happy to answer any questions or have any discussions on the possibilities in terms of the EDF, what its role is, and how it fits in with the larger Redwood Rise program.
And I do want to add that this totally makes sense and it's what we will propose, but ultimately the collaborative will decide how things flow. I can't imagine they would look at this and think this is an unreasonable way to flow. And sometimes it's nice to give them an option so that they could see how it is. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, great.
Yes, I'll share it with you. Oh, wait, no, I can't share it with you. Josh will have to.
Yeah, I mean, we've shared, or maybe Abigail can put the link back in the chat of the current slideshow, and so this is on there, and everyone should be able to view the slideshow, and we will send out a copy of that after today's workshop. But definitely, Ross and Greg, seeing your diagram, boy, this is nice to have such a simple two-stroke engine here. Understanding that, they are quite, the projects can get super complicated, and all of them have all of these nuances that are unique. I think that's why there is this machine of money people who get out there. I know when I was overseeing the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, we issued a $30 million tax revenue bond to tear down old buildings at Fort Ord. And I was just amazed at the number of people and the types of people that we had to deal with to, get all of that done, from underwriters to risk managers to, all different kinds of municipal advisors and all of that. And so, yeah, there's a lot to it. So anyone with thoughts on this diagram, please send them back to us. Otherwise, I think we would proceed as this is our proposal for the HRTC or the collaborative to consider as to how this group might add value to what they're trying to do now.
Josh, it looked like Marianne wanted to say something. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, so I'm talking with my sector table lead hat on for a second. So I love the simplicity of this, great. But we have a bunch of other obligations or gauntlets that I like to say we have to go through. Would we have to go through all of those? Because one of the things that I think is beautiful about this is, yes, I have a whole list of projects and everybody is doing their best to figure out what it would cost and how to fund it. But what I see is happening here is that would we be able to come to this group and say, okay, these are like the top 5, which are, which might be able to get some combination of funding? Like, would this group help?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea here. Again, this is very simplistic rendering of, what each project. I mean, I think this is a topic that Brian is going to talk about next, which is, the review that we've done of the projects, the 37 or 40 projects that have been submitted so far. There's a huge range of not only cost, but sort of even having a budget, in the spreadsheet. And so I think if we're really serious about considering, the feasibility, the financing feasibility of any project, there's going to need to be not to steal Brian's thunder too much, but a, validation and verification and a bit of a consultative process to first really understand where, some of these projects are in reality, And then next, you know, depending on how important they are and how much time there is to do, you know, there could be quite an undertaking of sort of project readiness consulting. And I think that's a subject that we will talk about, we need to talk about. But the basic thinking, or the short answer, at least in my mind, Marianne, was that, you know, yeah, this would be a place for maybe not all the projects, you know, I think, because I think there's got to be a resource management. But if you guys could get to like a top 5, you know, then maybe this group could help
Right.
refine those down. Yeah.
And just seeing what you've shared today gives an idea, like I could figure out what ones maybe need to come to you as a consultation to say, these are the ones most likely to, again, pass all the different other hurdles that we have to get through. So that would be great. That would be great, especially if we could have that ahead of time before it even goes up to the collaborative.
Yeah, so all of that is, I think, let's keep talking about it. I'm glad to hear that we're thinking in the same direction, and then how we actually do that. I mean, again, you know, Ross and Greg talked about, and I just referenced the phalanx of people whose day job it is to really get into the nitty-gritty on projects. How this group could sort of take it from maybe a 30,000 foot view down to a 20 or 15 or 10,000 foot view, maybe what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Any other topics on this one? Okay. So Brian, do you want to talk about what you found in doing this evaluation?
Sure. So turning now to the project submittals and our initial analysis of them, as Josh indicated, there were 37 projects. And as I went through it, I developed, as you can see on one of the attachment 3, I believe it is, a summary of the financial aspects of it. Because again, obviously the EDF's role is analyzing the finances essentially, and other groups such as the sector tables will be analyzing other aspects of these projects. And I did pull out 3, and because some of them could have been phased, and so that's how we got from 37 to 40. Now I recognize that because these projects will first pass through the sector tables before they come to the EDF, not all 40 will come to you ultimately, but nevertheless, since that was the starting point, I thought we would start there with the analysis. And one of the things that you'll see as we go through the slides is we're also trying to come up with a standard method to evaluate each project's finances and kind of a framework, you know, given how much time we have in this year's cycle versus future year cycles, will determine how much of the, you know, this process gets used this year versus long term. But we wanted to give you some food for thought. In terms of the projects themselves, there's quite a wide range. Can we go back to the previous slide?
All right.
There we go. Yeah, as Josh had indicated earlier, there's quite a range. I mean, the project proposals are anywhere from $15,000 all the way up to $28 million. I think significantly more than half of the projects, 23 of the 40, are in the range of $750,000 or less. And I think that's significant because many of these low dollar project proposals are things that you would probably look at in terms of your $9 million of available funds and whether you would grant some of the funding there versus using various financing tools, which would likely happen once you get to the projects that are in the millions of dollars. As we indicate in the slide, if you added up all the projects, their total cost is in excess of $136 million. And we also note in the analysis that of the 40 projects, 8 of them were submitted without any budgetary numbers at all. So the ultimate cost of all the projects is actually even higher than that. So now we can go on to the next slide. And in the next slide, you can see and this is also in the written report, by the way, this is the distribution of the dollar amounts by project. And I put them in ranges again, just to give everybody a relative feel for what we're looking at. So again, you got 6 projects under 100,000, 9 in the 125 to 750 range, 8 with no estimate, and then the others are in the $1 to $25 million range. So we'll move on to the next slide. And here's some of the observations that we have and some recommendations. And again, these are things that we observed, and we also, again, recognize that there is some interaction between the sector tables, the steering group, and this group, and also the fact that projects are still coming in. So the first thing that we noted is that obviously somewhere, whether it's this group or the sector tables or the steering group, someone needs to think about what is the deadline in terms of submitting projects, because we really can't start down the road of evaluating the projects and their feasibility until we have all of them in hand. So our first recommendation basically is establishing a date by which all the projects have to be turned in. We have listed in the staff report March 31st, but again, that's just to start the discussion. I suspect that those of you who've been working on the project have a better handle for whether that's the right date or something later on might make sense. Secondarily, and also related, is getting at the 8 projects that don't have a budget estimate. We think that in addition to setting a deadline for any project submittals that haven't come in yet, we also have to ask the people who put in projects without financing information to develop that. And that could be, again, the same date as projects are due. And again, we'll leave it up to you to decide whether March 31st is the right date or that another date makes more sense.
Yeah, and of course, if I might, Brian, just a couple points there. You know, on the last one, oftentimes for any grant funding proposal, if you don't have a budget, you're non-compliant submission. So that would kind of say, you know, set the date. If you can get something in that meet the bare minimum, then you're in. Otherwise, you have to wait to another opportunity, kind of thing. That would kind of be one way to deal with that.
I do want to make another comment too, especially about the March 31st date. You know, the sector tables are just starting, and we opened the project pipeline because people had this incredibly strong need to start getting some of their project ideas in. But
Yeah.
really, the sector tables haven't had a chance to start thinking about their own either. And we're still in officially the planning process, not in the project process. So I would
Okay.
not expect it's going to happen as soon as you guys would like. I just wanted to be upfront about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, we're just putting these ideas out there based on like our kind of understanding of the timelines, understanding also the state has been super slow in getting everything out. So whatever is a realistic, what we're advocating for here is a realistic target. And so who develops that realistic target? Is that you? Is that Marianne?
So
Somebody
Stephen,
else.
I just want to say that when you, it would be good for us to talk about it, because we were actually told, we had been moving down this path, but we were told to pull back on the inventory. So,
Okay.
you know, everybody needs to be told to start it back up again. So I just, you know,
Yeah.
I just want to say, because I'm cool with this. I think this is great, by the way. I'm like, yeah, but now because we stopped, like March 31st, we can't have something.
Yeah, it's a bit of we're in a place right now where people are chomping at the bit to get stuff done, but officially we're still in the planning process
Okay.
from the state's perspective, and so we sort of have to stay in their timeline as well. But
So-
once we
so-
start, we're going to have to be really fast because our catalyst grant's really short. So
Well, yeah, that's what I was curious about. Maybe are there, maybe we could follow up after, but basically, you know, eventually we want to get to something that we like as a target for these items, and then also understanding what is the full time frame within which these catalyst funds have to be decided upon, because that will really affect what even this working group can offer that whole process. If it's a, you know, short turnaround, I don't know that, you know, all those factors will come into play. So to be continued on that. Looks like Anna's got her hand raised.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I think when the original request for proposals went out, the budget wasn't mandatory. So there might need to be communication back to, you know, submitted projects that, you know, a budget is needed in the selection process. So that should be, you know, taken into consideration before anything is just kind of pulled out of the queue.
Absolutely. And I think those are Brian's good points there that he made. So that leads us right to the third bullet, Brian, that you can move ahead with there if you want.
All right, fair enough. And the third bullet point has to do with ultimately developing a project budget form. And again, this relates to a comment Josh made earlier about, because of the telescope timeline in this year's round, some of these things may happen more to benefit future years than this year's process. But the thing that we observed in looking through the 40 projects is that it was a bit difficult to discern in each case the total project cost per fiscal year, available funding, and how much was asked for from RISE. You know, again, the table that you see in attachment 3 is my interpretation by each of the projects, going through all 40 of what I think the project sponsors intended, but that's not to say that those are always accurate. So in the perfect world, I think the EDF would want to have a project budget form in addition to the current process for submitting a project, so that the information that the EDF will need to provide feedback to the sector tables and ultimately the steering group is in hand. And again, that is something that could be developed for this cycle if there is time available. If not, could be developed in the future. And again, in this recommendation, we're kind of also looking to the whole concept of part of RGS's role here is to give you tools and to give you a framework to evaluate these projects financially, both this year and in the future. So the fourth item has to do with project resourcing. And here what we wanted to flag was, given the fact that you have 40 projects already and you are likely to get more, we did have some concern about the need in terms of staffing, whether this is at Cal Poly or somewhere else, to go through each of these projects and format them in such a way that the EDF can evaluate and ultimately provide feedback on each of the ones that come in from the sector tables. So we don't have a specific recommendation on how this could be done, but we wanted to flag it in terms of something you need to think about. And then the final recommendation, and this is kind of looking forward a bit, is presumably that once we have all the projects and once all of the questions have been answered in terms of what is the cost, what is the request from RISE, what resources are needed, there's going to be a need to create a review process and a scoring form. Again, we're trying to put the EDF group and members in a position so that once the projects come over from the sector tables, they'll have a framework, scoring tables, and all the information they'll need to provide the input that's being requested. So those, in effect, are the 5 recommendations that came out of this particular review.
Thank you, Brian. I see there is some good chat in the chat, and are there any topics that need more conversation while we're here at the moment? And again, keep in mind that we are bringing these topics and this material to the working group to have engagement and conversation on the spot, but also to stimulate your thinking and follow on communications with us between now and the next time we get together if there are items that need refinement or further focus. And I see that Greg's got his hand raised.
I'm trying to start my video. There we go. So I just speed read through the PowerPoint that Susan put in the chat, and as I read it quickly, it talks about how the SFP is not going to, for implementation funds, won't even be released until September. So are we just talking catalyst? And I think Marianne had a similar question in the chat now that I look. Are we just talking about criteria for the catalyst funds, or are we talking for implementation? Because it sounds like the process to develop criteria for the implementation may just be starting. Is that right?
I'd say my answer to that, Greg and Susan, you can respond, I guess, first, but I have a response. Go ahead, Susan.
I would actually think Dana might have the better response.
Okay, yeah.
if she's available. I hate to speak for the state when the state is here.
Well,
But my
you know-
guess is that what they're looking for, ultimately, they want us to fund catalyst projects that will ultimately be implementation worthy projects. So I would assume that the recommendations would be,
But we don't know what implementation worthy means yet. Is that right?
Yeah, but I would just say, let me just say this, keep in mind that this group is not evaluating the projects under the whole criteria that the state is putting up. This group is focused on the finance readiness of projects. And so whether that's the catalyst funds or the implementation funds, that's a separate issue. What we need to do is focus on, can we develop a repeatable method that can be, like enough that won't require the phalanx of attorneys and specialists that are involved in, major funding projects like was described earlier, but that this group, you got to add value to the decision-making process of the collaborative and saying, we think these projects are gonna be, there's a path to taking it from whatever the catalyst funding or the, implementation funding you have to offer, and giving it a path to building a stack that'll get the project really off the ground. So
do we, and I'll shut up after this last question. Do we envision that being a parallel process with the other criteria? In other words, are we gonna spend a lot of time evaluating projects that then whatever the decision-making body, I guess I'm part of that, the other decision-making body kick
if
out?
it works the way we're expecting it to, the sector table will send us projects that they believe fit the other criteria.
Yeah, but the sector tables are kind of self-interested, are they not? They're forwarding their own projects. There's going to be another layer, which is the voting block, that'll decide whether or not it meets the criteria, and ultimately the state will, right? So I'm just wondering where we inject ourselves into that discussion so we aren't wasting a lot of time doing financial analysis if something doesn't meet other criteria. Okay, and now I'm done. I'm sorry.
Again, Greg, I would advocate for the fact that anybody smartly positioning for a project for funding is going to take into account all the criteria that they have to consider, from, their local sector table all the way up to what the state's trying to accomplish, and build that into the framing for the project. So again, I think our dream, and like Marianne, I think, described it well, is if the sector tables could get to a place of 3 to 5 projects that could come here and be the subject of, passing through this to be developed finance readiness filter, and we could filter something back so it's down from 5 to 3, that would be progress in my estimation. So Layla, I see you're patiently waiting.
Sure, yeah, and I think Marianne and Stacy had their hands up as well. So some of this discussion is answering some of my questions. So let me play this back at you. The sector tables are rummaging around, and they're going to be lifting up strategically appropriate projects, both for catalyst fund / pre-implementation, and then later for implementation dollars. We are going to take a look at the investment readiness of those small number of projects. I'm assuming that the sector tables are going to use as their source material the completed inputs to the project inventory form, along with other stuff that they happen to know about. And one of the things that I've had in the back of my mind with respect to this particular working group is that we are at some point going to be seeing projects that are still finance and or fundable, that maybe don't fit with SURF, but that might fit with other public or public-private funding opportunities that we want to help the sources bring to bear, the applicants bring to bear. The other thing that I've had in the back of my mind is we're going to be taking a look at projects, especially when it comes to the Catalyst Fund inventory, that need a little bit of help to get through their pre-development steps. And so it's also an opportunity for local private and non-local private sources of funding and financing to support what the Catalyst Fund won't pay for when it comes to the full pre-development path that gets us to shovel ready. So I'm saying all of this out loud so someone can tell me, no, you misunderstood this or that part of it, but also because it seems like the folks that are in this Zoom room are well positioned to do those things if they choose to, either as part of this group or not. It would be a shame to see all of these projects and to find some that might not be a perfect fit for California Jobs First, Redwood Region Rise, and not then take the opportunity to do something about them. That's what's on my mind.
Yeah.
Did you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think there's general agreement. I think the constraints will be, you know, the ability to handle whatever volume of requests for the different types of support is needed. But I think, you know, I can tell you from my understanding of the Sacramento, you know, leanings is that the California Jobs First is not a one and done program, that this is kind of working to establish some kind of new long lasting framework for regional economic, you know, project prioritization and, you know, planning and implementation. So I would hope that, you know, just again, if folks projects aren't mature at this level, that yeah, continued engagement, education, awareness, and finance sourcing and all of that will lead to more things happening. I mean, one thing I can tell you from my own career, especially in the Fort Ord area, you know, that I was there for now 10 years, and it preceded me by 20. And so it's, you know, been a 30-year project. And I think everybody here, you know, us and the team talked about their 11-year journey on that one. You know, so these things obviously take time. And yeah, you know, we're kind of servicing a bunch of dreams, and some are more mature than others. And so, you know, this I think hopefully this body has some long lasting function and value in that regard. That's what I would say.
Well,
Mary,
can we
go ahead.
please start to, I'm going to plant the seed, a regional pre-development / gap fund for the projects that can't, for example, handle reimbursement only, or that need to get started and are ready to go. Just some pooled fund would be an interesting thing to muck about with in this group as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and you will see that there is, I think it's mega regional, but the RCRC folks have put in, even in our area, a proposal to do just that. I think you know, I'm interested to hear people's take on how that could actually work. It seems like it's maybe centralizing control of the funds more than people would like, but I'd be interested to hear, because they are basically saying, you know, a unified fund would have longer lasting, you know, value in that regard. But Susan, did you want to say something else? Sorry.
I was going to say, as part of that project, they do want a big chunk of our Catalyst funds to go to them. However, I don't see why we couldn't have a presentation about what they want to do to this group.
Okay.
I'll talk to Amanda about that. I don't want to,
Okay.
just because this group might be able to provide a different kind of feedback than some of the other groups would. So
I think that's a good idea, actually, because there's if you look at that project list, you see the number, you're like, wow, man, okay, they must have something really big here. Okay, we got to move along, because I know that Tracy's got some stuff, but Marianne, you've been patiently waiting, so let's do you, and then we can get to Tracy.
Getting more confused as I stay here longer. I guess what I was going to say, and now Layla, you got me thinking about a whole bunch of other stuff, but I'm not going to say anything about that. But if EDP could do anything, it would be helpful for every sector table to have the same form by which they operate. That, like, I don't care really what it is, but just let us all be in the same, because there's been so many different ways to slice and dice this. And we've been slicing and dicing without knowing the criteria. Now, I think the criteria has come out, but after this conversation, I'm kind of wondering if we have it. So I'd have to go back and see, but if there was even just some kind of form, basic budgeting form, because remember, on the ground, you have people who are all over the map, right? You have people who really know what they're doing and they've worked with every federal and state agency in the world. You have other people who have never done anything. So you have a real range. So a single form that everybody conforms to, at least for your research, for the help that you want to offer. The other thing, and I don't know whether this is feasible, but office hours. I mean, if you guys could do office hours, that would be really great. And, you know, people want to come in. I mean, I'm a sector table lead. I'm helping people try to figure out these things because I know a lot about state and federal agencies, but I can't, you know, the stuff that you just presented this morning, you know, isn't stuff that I would be able to go deep on. But maybe if somebody had a project and you had set hours a few days a week, you know, even 15 minutes or 30 minutes, people would get a sense of what they should be doing. I think that's really good. And, you know, we're really in a bind thinking about criteria, what the state wants, what the region wants, what the counties want. Everybody has a different set of what pre-development means. So, you know.
And just to remind you that the state criteria is proposed right now. It's not official, so.
Right, see that?
Yeah,
That's
so
it.
it's not like we're keeping it from you guys
Right.
or holding back.
So that's another thing. It's like,
I
yeah,
feel like we're in an early version of Google Maps. We're going to drive right into a lake.
Just keep going. That's one thing that I've discovered is just keep going and you can make your future. And to the office hours point, we did do some thinking and organizing around this. I forget where it landed, Susan, but let's pick that one back up because I know we had some traffic on that. So that's a good suggestion, Marianne, and maybe we can make that happen sooner than later. Okay, we have another sort of body of material that we wanted to go through that our team member Tracy Fuller has been spending some time on, looking at our ability to organize a regional information resource around what around different financings that have happened. And so we have done some thinking, and Tracy has actually uncovered quite a trove of public records data that are interesting to look at from that perspective. And I think it also brings up questions about how we might be wanting to think about other non-public data sources. But this graph, just to kind of, again, bring back to your mind what the different sources of funding are that we talked about from the beginning here. And then this one is kind of further breaking them down into these, you know, debt or revenue and grant sources. And so, Tracy, if you want to take it from here and then talk about your thinking and work around the tools database, the economic development finance tools database, and where we're at with that, that would be great. You're still on mute, though.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hope I'm not on mute. Okay, so thank you. And I'm just focusing entirely upon the debt portion of it, not the funding portion of it. Thanks for clarifying and touching that distinction again. So you have a staff report or a report. I'm not going to go through that in any great detail because I presume you've all had an opportunity to read it. But I just wanted to point out a couple things about it. First of all is we're always going to provide a fairly rich background with some links, and that you are the sophisticated users of this information. You already know all of this stuff, but in the future, as different coalition members may plug in or different members of the public may plug in, we want to try to have enough information in place to allow them to come up to speed. And so you'll see some of this background information that you might wonder why it's there. That's why it's there. I wanted to call your attention to the link at the very bottom of the first page. where we have provided a link to the news release from the state regarding the $14 million that Susan mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. So if you want to read all about it there, you just click on that link and you can go there. The focus of I'm going to pivot into talking about the database tools, the database itself, and you can see on page 2 the various types of tools that have been used, just focusing on the 4-county region represented by the Redwood Rise area. And that's a subset of, you know, everything that's available out there in the world, but it's nice to know what has been used locally in the past. The 4-county region, you probably know this, 213 different political subdivisions, counties, municipalities, special districts, school districts, etc. Not all of these agencies necessarily, not all of the 213 political subdivisions are really technically going to be eligible for debt issuance, but your counties, municipalities, school districts are. And it's always good to know who is issuing a lot of debt, what kind of debt are they issuing, and this will give a little bit of a window into that question. And the folks who really aren't eligible for the issuance of debt exactly are usually subordinate agencies of the county or something like that. So if they have a need for debt, they will be rolled up into the county's issuance. And many of you, I'm sure, already know that. So you can see here there are a collection. They're just alphabetized there in that list. And if you were to bring up Abigail, the PowerPoint, just roll forward to maybe a couple more. There we go. So we did look at how these different types were organized through a couple different filters. One was to look at them by who's doing what, and one was to look at them by virtue of what type of debt is being issued and what's the volume of debt. So I'm going to talk about who's doing what first, since that's kind of easy to talk about. And you can see a little chart on page 3 that addresses it by county, and every column represents a type of issuer. I've organized them from left to right, the biggest issuer to the smallest issuer. And the big caveat to understand about this information is that it's a 20-year look back. I did pull data that went back actually a couple decades earlier, but the transparency reporting requirements that exist today and in 2023 are very different than the ones that existed 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So the information as we move through the decades gets better and better and better. And I don't think anybody is really going to get a huge aha out of something that somebody did in 1993, right? So we might as well get rid of that data out of the data set. Also pointing out that in the middle of this page, you'll see that there's actually a link to the source data. So if you would like to go in there and look at it yourself, you're welcome to do that. And you'll see every single solitary agency, every city, every school district, and so forth. Every agency has their debt listed there, and you could play with it yourself if you wanted to, or you could see what specifically your agency has reported. Given that this is a 20-year look back, you'll also, don't be confused by the fact that there will be redundancies. Someone might have refunded or refinanced something, so that would show up, technically as 2 issuances. So that would inflate the number that you're seeing. But by the same token, there are things in here that are not reported that would that are decreasing the number from what it ought to be. Specifically things like conduit revenue bonds, which may get reported by an aggregating debt issuer, those aren't going to show up under, the city of Crescent City, for example. Those would show up with whatever pool they participated in and be reported under the pool's name. So it's very hard to get at that data via the state and federal databases. Also in the mix here, somebody mentioned redevelopment. Redevelopment debt exists. It's getting paid off by the successor agencies to former redevelopment agencies that I'm sure exist in your region. There's lots of them. That's also not reflected here. And also there are a couple of aggregating agencies, specifically like this, the state agency loan fund, which you undoubtedly have much more debt in your region that's being financed by that group, or being issued by that group, I should say, than is reflected on this list. So this is a fuzzy look, is how I would like to characterize this for you. But what can we glean from it? Well, we can glean the big picture stuff, and there's no surprise here. No surprise that the school districts lead the list as the biggest issuers. That's a factor of probably, I think, the fact that they are mostly issuing very conventional ad valorem property tax based debt frequently, because that they can get that past the voters, whereas most other agencies doing other types of things have there's a bigger hurdle to get that kind of general obligation bond debt passed. So it's not surprising that we see them at the front of the list. Special districts often have the ability to finance things, number one, through fee structures as their funding source or their revenue stream, which they have to do a 218 process for, but they're all generally very good at those. And then when they go to issue debt, they're often in a pool, and that pool isn't showing up on this list because their debt is buried in some pool that may not be, a regionally connected pool, but a state of California pool or some other pool. Anyways, so I just share it with you because we've got access to the data. We might as well have it. I wanted to share the link to the source data with you. Because this report is focused on traditional historical financing tools, there are no surprises here. Developing revenue sources and ongoing revenue streams is necessary to make annual payments on any debt issue. This makes the issuance of debt possible, of course, you all know that. Distinguishing between revenue streams, sometimes called funding, and financing is important. And I will keep coming back, and I'm sure Brian will keep coming back to always trying to distinguish in our conversations between funding and financing. Funding always referring to a revenue stream. And I always am frustrated that the word fund or funding gets used and thrown around so much in finance and accounting. We all have general funds. What does that mean? So whenever we're in this conversation, when we're talking about funding, we're going to be talking about revenue streams. And financing, we're going to be talking really about debt or the downstream consequence of a revenue generation strategy that has the ability to support debt. So going on, since we can't really get at individual bits of information in the state and federal databases, how do we get at it? We have to go and look at individual reports, individual financial reports. All the agencies are, of course, producing reports every single year, and a very simple look back to make sure, we just wanted to make sure we're looking at what's happened in the past. This exercise is necessary just to make sure that we're considering the lay of the land and also making sure that there aren't any really big surprises. Understanding these figures within the context of individual agencies might conceivably be a next step after the projects are sort of settled down upon. It would be premature to look at individual agencies at this stage of the game because there's a lot more agencies than there are going to be agencies on the project list. So that might be something we'll loop back around on after the project list takes a more final or better form, a more complete form. But we will want to look at what each agency's liability profile looks like, and what the combined debt is for every agency. I want to just talk as an example, Humboldt County, why it's so important to look at that kind of stuff. So Humboldt County, they're showing, you look at their annual report, you're going to see a figure of 29 million. That might sound like a bigger or little number, depending upon your perspective, but it's important to recognize that 18 million of that is compensated absences. So that isn't going anywhere. And not reflected in the 29 million is the $243 million of CalPERS pension liabilities, which is always going to be the real bonding capacity delimiter for all of the local agencies. So it was looping back to the chart that talked about what has been issued. I was actually surprised to see that the only agency in the region who has issued pension obligation bonds is Lake. So that surprised me a little bit, which suggests to me that they're either participating in pools or they haven't. That's kind of a little bit of a new-ish thing, and maybe they just haven't done it yet. But if they haven't done it yet, they're all still carrying that on their balance sheets. That means that there's a lot of liability there on the carried on those balance sheets that hasn't been mitigated by any debt financing tool, and that will be a delimiting factor or a limiting factor for the issuance of future debt. Hope I'm not getting too wonky here on it.
Thank you, Tracy. I think no, this is all very useful information. And not to cut you off too much, but we do have a time set for the conclusion of this engagement.
So, and I think I have one more minute. So my final sentence was going to be that although I might appear to be the bearer of bad news, I wanted to close this look back at the historical debt with the encouragement that this information shouldn't suppress the aspirational projects that you're adding to the project list and developing the estimates for. That obviously needs to be where the focus of everybody's energy ought to be. And just because there might be some things with respect to CalPERS that would need to be addressed, I want to encourage everybody to flesh that project list out robustly. And you're better to put it on there than to hold back and not put it on there. And thank you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, one more thing, if I could just jump right in. Could you go back to the previous slide that Tracy had?
Yes.
This is the one that was that one. Thank you. One thing I wanted to point out and kind of link it back to the earlier discussion we had, you'll notice on the right-hand column when it talks about debt issued and the amounts, that the lowest debt was 1.3 million, and from 1.3 million to around 5 million, those tend to be private placement or bank borrowings. And this again goes back to my earlier point about as we evaluate projects, particularly on the EDF, we really want to look at the dollar value requested because of the cost of doing debt issues with all the underwriters and attorneys and others that were mentioned earlier. There's a certain minimum amount you have to go after to even do a debt issue. So it may be the case that if the projects that are under $1 million, those might be considered not debt issue candidates, and the ones in the 1 million to 5 million and 10 million and up or more debt related. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Tracy, for doing that great work and bringing it this summary. I think it reflects one aspect of at least the ideal of this EDF tools database that we talked about, which was, providing some view of the status of financing for economic development outcomes throughout the region. Now there are, and I think inherent in the SURF collaborative and all of that, there are a whole host of new players at the table in this space who some of whom, have connections to historic roles of local government in making all this stuff happen, that I think are contributing to the mix of project types that have been submitted and dreams about what is going to happen with this program. And so our goal, or our part of our challenge, I guess, is to be able to, get efficiently access to this publicly available information that we can, and in the realm of philanthropy or public-private partnerships, or other private placement data or whatever that's not readily public, we're going to have to think long and hard about how important is it for us to develop a more comprehensive picture of what's happened around the region to help make informed decisions in regards to the SURF program. But I think we're gonna need some more time, and also please take the time to share the project encouragement people to submit projects. This is just reminding us that we're in a couple phases of the work, and this is our contact information. So one thing I did want to remind folks about is 2 weeks from today, we have organized for a focus session again on the topic of enhanced infrastructure financing districts. And so this is a topic that we have touched on throughout our sessions briefly, but this one will be another kind of local expert session. Well, it will actually be a local expert, Scott Adair in the county of Humboldt, paired with an external expert, Joe Dieguez from Cosmont, who worked with them to put together the Samoa Peninsula EIFD. And they will go into some depth on how that was done and what the expected outcomes are and community benefits and all of that. Thinking and talking about redevelopment earlier, the EIFD have emerged as really the lead horse in post-redevelopment finance options. And so I think, though it may, for some of us, it's, sort of acronyms of the trade. For others, it may be a new concept, but definitely worth knowing about, especially at the local, government level, but even folks who are not within local government who may want their projects to occur within local government boundaries. So counties and cities will want to know about this mechanism. So Dana's shaking her head. Dana, do you have any final thoughts for us here?
No, but your last point is one that I was just raising earlier with another region. Now would be a good time to engage with your municipal jurisdictional partners and at the county level as you start thinking about your projects, because to your point, Josh, a lot of potential projects are going to be on those lands and or managed by those, project managed by those. So your council of governments, all of those, you guys it would be great to engage with them. And I just also, just one quick reminder as it relates to Catalyst. I don't mean to digress, but I just want to make this clear. Your Catalyst criteria is your criteria. The state is not going to necessarily, we're not going to, you don't have to share your criteria with us as you start to make your Catalyst funding decisions. However, it would seem to be important to align your criteria that you develop for your Catalyst awards. You align those with what will eventually be the implementation criteria. There are alignment opportunities to consider. And with the current proposed criteria out now, And then the draft criteria that will be released later on April, May timeframe for public comment. There is plenty of time and opportunity for you to pull some of those key elements in to whatever criteria you want to develop for your catalyst funding. Does that
Thank
make
you
sense?
so much, Dana. I wish I would have known that earlier, because I was assuming it was the same, because the catalyst would be going into implementation potentially, but
Yeah.
that wording was really helpful, so.
Yeah, so the key there is the alignment opportunity and the fact that you're developing your criteria for the Catalyst Awards decisions that you all will be making. And Josh, I appreciated the slide deck or the slide that you shared about your decision-making process looked, right in line. But the state's not going to tell you, here's what your catalyst criteria should be, but you should think about aligning with what's happening in the implementation criteria.
Yeah.
Does that,
So
hope that helps?
just looking down the path where the puck is going and where you want to be.
Hello, Wayne Gretzky. There you go. But let's also remind ourselves too that many or significant parts of federal grant criteria and eligibility that's being developed and included in these NOFOs that are starting to come out, their criteria is looking very similar to the implementation criteria that has been proposed by the state. So that if you have a project that may not get into the implementation queue, but instead it's going to go pursue a federal grant outside of implementation, it's going to already meet the criteria because you're already incorporating it. You've already got it. You've already thought about it. So there's a lot of shared criteria between what has been proposed and what's coming out of the federal government.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that, Dana. I think it's interesting having been on the periphery as the Jobs First program has emerged. Before it was a thing, then it became SURF, now it became this, and seeing, the sort of process of grand, broad funnel thinking, and now kind of needing to come down to like some real brass tacks. I think it'll be interesting conversations that start to happen over the next 3 to 6 months in terms of, what are viable projects and all of the above in the context of these different influences. But definitely, yeah, we've got work to do. And so please, I think we've shared some information. Calendar holds for the April 3rd, which will be the EIFD thing. Again, we will record that and put it online. All this stuff will be on the website for the project. But anybody who may be thinking about a project that will be either within a city or a county, and who may, have engagements with those local jurisdictions, you might want to get their heads at this meeting, because maybe the local government folks could benefit from, refreshed understanding of what this EIFD mechanism is and how it could relate to their ability to contribute to a project happening. And one final thing I'll say on that is, they're long leads. So they don't necessarily start with a bunch of value. They're built on the projection of increased property tax revenue over time. So that it's important to kind of get them set up before the project is going, so the increase in the property tax value happens during the lifespan of the district. And that's really, I think, the way that the local funding can come in, and actually that can be the mechanism to drive a bond, to fuel a bond issue, so you can get some money up front to do the project. So that's kind of Josh's ABC on EIFD. So with that, I think we're well over time. Thank you all for sticking around. And Stacy, I'll be seeing you and Robert, I guess, on Monday in Ukiah for that session. And please get back to us, you know, in the meantime with your different questions and ideas. And great to see everybody. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Okay.